I want to tell you about a man who learned something most people never admit, that sometimes the cruelty we face at work isn't about our performance at all. It's about power. And the moment we stop pretending otherwise is the moment everything changes. His name was Daniel. Mid-30s, software engineer, good at his job. Not brilliant, but dependable. The kind of person who showed up early, stayed late when needed, never caused trouble. He had one of those faces that looked naturally pleasant. Not fake, not forced, just open. Like he hadn't yet learned to guard himself the way most of us do by that age. And that's what his boss hated. I met Daniel years after this story took place, during a session where he was working through something entirely different, a relationship issue, if I remember correctly. But halfway through, he mentioned this old workplace situation, almost in passing, and I stopped him, because the way he told it, with that strange mix of disbelief and clarity, I knew it was a story that mattered, not just to him, to anyone who's ever felt small in a room where they shouldn't have. So let me tell you what happened.
Daniel worked for a mid-sized tech company. Nothing glamorous. The kind of place where the coffee was always lukewarm and the motivational posters on the walls have been there since 2009. His boss, let's call him Roger, was one of those men who wore his authority like armor. Loud voice, firm handshakes, the kind of guy who thought leadership meant never admitting uncertainty. Roger didn't like Daniel. And Daniel knew it. You always know, don't you? Even when nothing overt has been said. You can feel it in the way someone looks past you in meetings, or how your ideas get acknowledged with a nod and then immediately dismissed. But Daniel kept his head down. He did his work. He stayed polite. He smiled when people greeted him in the hallways, helped colleagues debug their code, brought donuts on Fridays. He thought that if he just kept being good at his job, kept being pleasant, it would be enough. That's the thing about people like Daniel. They believe in fairness. They believe that kindness and competence will eventually speak for themselves. And most of the time, they're wrong. It started small, a comment here and there. Roger would walk past Daniel's desk and say things like, "You seem awfully cheerful today. Must be nice not to have real pressure." Or, during team meetings, "Daniel's always smiling. Guess some people just don't take things as seriously." At first, Daniel laughed it off. He thought maybe Roger was joking. Maybe it was just his sense of humor. But the comments kept coming, and they started to sting. Have you ever had someone weaponize something harmless about you? Something you didn't even know could be used against you? That's what this was. Roger had found a soft spot, not a flaw, just a trait, and he pressed on it, again and again. One afternoon, Roger called Daniel into his office. No warning, no agenda, just, "Got a minute?" Daniel sat down, still smiling, because that's what he did, that's who he was, and Roger leaned back in his chair, hands folded behind his head, and said, "I've been thinking about your performance." Daniel's stomach dropped, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he knew, in that moment, that this wasn't about performance at all. "You're doing fine," Roger continued, "but fine isn't great. And I need great. I need people who are hungry, who show urgency, and honestly, Daniel, you just seem too comfortable, too relaxed, like this is all just easy for you." Daniel tried to explain. He talked about the projects he'd completed ahead of schedule, the bugs he'd fixed, the way he'd mentored 2 junior developers. But Roger waved it all away. Yeah, I see all that. But there's something about your attitude. You're always smiling, always upbeat. It sends the wrong message. People might think you're not taking things seriously. And if I'm being honest, I'm starting to wonder the same thing." Daniel sat there stunned. He didn't know what to say. What do you say when someone tells you that your face, your natural expression, is a problem? Roger continued. "So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to adjust your salary, just temporarily, until I see a shift, a little more intensity, a little less cheer. A salary cut. Not because of poor performance, not because of missed deadlines or client complaints, because Daniel smiled too much. Let me pause here and tell you what was happening in Daniel's mind at that moment, because this is where psychology becomes important. When we experience something absurd, something that violates our sense of fairness, our brain doesn't always register it as real. There's a lag, a kind of disbelief. Daniel heard the words, but part of him thought he must have misunderstood, because cutting someone's salary for smiling wasn't logical. It wasn't legal, technically, though Roger framed it as a performance issue. It was cruelty, disguised as management. But here's the thing about people like Roger. They don't need logic. They need control. And when someone like Daniel, someone who refuses to be bitter, who shows up with openness and warmth, exists in their orbit, it feels like a threat. Not consciously, maybe, but deep down, Roger saw Daniel's smile as defiance, as a refusal to be afraid. And Roger needed people to be afraid. Daniel left that office in a daze. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just left. And that night, lying awake in bed, he felt something shift inside him. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. He realized he'd been playing a game he couldn't win. A game where the rules changed based on one man's insecurity. And he decided, quietly, that he was done playing. Where are you watching from right now? I'd love to know. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever worked for someone who made you feel small for no reason? Because I think most of us have. And most of us remember exactly how it felt.
Daniel didn't quit. Not right away. That's not how these stories usually go, is it? We imagine the dramatic walkout, the angry resignation letter, the mic drop moment. But real life is messier. Real life is sitting at your desk the next morning, pretending everything is fine, while something inside you is quietly breaking. The salary cut went through. Not much, just enough to hurt. Enough to remind him every 2 weeks that he was being punished for something he couldn't change. And he did try to change it. That's the part that haunts me. He tried to smile less. He practiced in the mirror. Can you imagine? Practiced looking more serious, more intense. He stopped bringing donuts, stopped helping colleagues unless they explicitly asked. He thought maybe if he became a little harder, a little colder, Roger would back off. But it didn't work, because it was never about the smile. It was about power. And people like Roger don't stop when you comply. They escalate. Roger started nitpicking, questioning decisions Daniel had made 100 times before without issue. CCing him on emails with vague criticisms. Let's make sure we're staying focused on priorities. I'd like to see more urgency moving forward. Nothing concrete. Nothing Daniel could defend against. Just a constant drip of erosion. Have you ever been in that position? Where someone is clearly trying to push you out, but they're too cowardly to just fire you? So instead they create a hostile environment and wait for you to quit? It's psychological warfare, slow and deliberate.
Daniel started having trouble sleeping. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, replaying conversations in his head, wondering what he'd done wrong. His girlfriend noticed. His friends noticed. He was quieter, withdrawn. The smile that Roger hated so much, that easy, open warmth, started to fade. Not because Roger asked him to change it, because the environment was killing it. And that's when Daniel realized something crucial, something I wish more people understood sooner. He realized he was grieving. Not for the job, but for the version of himself he'd been before this started. The version who believed that doing good work and being kind was enough. The version who smiled because he was genuinely content, not because he was performing contentment. Grief is a strange thing. We usually associate it with death, with loss of a person. But you can grieve parts of yourself, too, parts that get worn down by cruelty or disappointment. And Daniel was grieving his own innocence in a way. The belief that the world, or at least the workplace, was fundamentally fair. But here's where the story turns. Because grief, when you let yourself feel it fully, can also be clarifying. One evening, Daniel got a message from a former colleague, someone who'd left the company a year earlier and now worked at a competitor. "Hey, we have an opening. Thought of you immediately. Interested?" Daniel almost deleted it, almost convinced himself he should stay, prove himself, win Roger over. That's what we do, isn't it? We internalize the criticism. We think if we just try harder, change more, shrink ourselves a little further, eventually we'll be enough. But then he remembered something, a moment from a few weeks earlier. He'd been in the break room, pouring coffee, and a junior developer, a kid fresh out of college, had asked him for advice about a project. And Daniel had helped him, walked him through the problem, and when they figured it out together, the kid grinned and said, "Man, you make everything seem so doable. I was freaking out before." Daniel realized in that moment that his openness, the thing Roger despised, was actually his strength. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't naivety. It was a refusal to let bitterness win. And maybe, in a different environment, that would be valued. So he responded to the message. "Yeah, let's talk." The interview process was fast. They wanted him, offered him more money than he'd been making before the cut, better benefits, a manager who, in the interview, actually smiled back at him.
When Daniel got the offer letter, he sat with it for a day. Not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to be intentional about what came next. He didn't want to leave out of anger. He wanted to leave because he was choosing something better. The day he decided to resign, he went into Roger's office. Same chair, same desk, but this time, Daniel wasn't afraid. "I'm giving my 2 weeks," he said. Calm, clear. Roger looked up, surprised. "2 weeks? Where are you going?" "I got another offer." Roger leaned back, that same posture, hands behind his head. "Well, I've been meaning to talk to you. I think we can work something out. Maybe revisit that salary adjustment. I know things have been tense, but…" Daniel interrupted him. Politely, but firmly. "I appreciate that, but I have already accepted the other offer." Roger's face changed. You know that look? The one where someone realizes they've miscalculated? That they pushed too hard and now they're about to lose something they didn't think they could lose? "Daniel, come on, be reasonable. Let's talk about this. What are they offering you?" And here's the moment Daniel told me about with that strange mix of pride and sadness. Because he didn't gloat. He didn't throw the number in Roger's face. He just said quietly, "It's not about the money. It's about working somewhere I don't have to apologize for who I am." Roger tried to respond, started to say something about team loyalty, about opportunities for growth. But Daniel was already standing up.
"I'll finish out my 2 weeks. I'll make sure everything's transitioned properly. But after that, I'm done." And he walked out. Have you ever had a moment like that, where you finally stood up for yourself, not with anger, but with clarity? Tell me in the comments, because I think those moments, as small as they seem, are the ones that define us. Daniel left that company 3 weeks later. The transition was smooth, professional. He didn't burn bridges. He didn't send a scathing goodbye email or post about it on social media. He just left and moved on. But here's the part of the story that matters most. The part I want you to sit with. A few months into his new job, Daniel told me he had a strange realization. He was happy. Not just relieved, not just glad to be away from Roger.
but genuinely happy. He was doing good work. His manager valued him. His colleagues appreciated his help. And somewhere along the way, without even trying, the smile came back. Not because he forced it, not because he performed it, but because he was in an environment that didn't punish him for it. And that's when he understood something I think we all need to hear. The way people treat you says more about them than it does about you. Roger didn't cut Daniel's salary because Daniel was doing something wrong. He did it because Daniel's ease, his refusal to shrink, to flinch, to play small, made Roger feel inadequate. And instead of dealing with his own insecurity, Roger tried to make Daniel carry it. That's what insecure leaders do. They don't build people up, they tear them down. Because if everyone around them is smaller, they get to feel bigger. But here's the truth Daniel learned, and the truth I want to leave you with. You don't have to stay in environments that require you to diminish yourself. I know it's not always easy. I know sometimes we feel trapped by bills, by fear, by the belief that we don't have options. But staying in a place that erodes your spirit, that punishes you for being who you are, is a different kind of trap. A slower, quieter one. And it costs more than you realize. Daniel told me that leaving that job was the first time in his adult life he'd chosen himself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. And once he did it once, it became easier to do it again. In other areas of his life, in relationships, in friendships, he started recognizing when he was bending himself to fit someone else's discomfort. And he stopped.
That's the lesson. Not that you should quit every time something's hard, not that you should walk away from every conflict, but that you should know the difference between a challenge that's helping you grow and a situation that's just breaking you down. Roger never apologized, never reached out, and Daniel didn't need him to, because closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes it comes from the choice you make to stop waiting for them to change and to simply walk toward something better. If you're in a situation right now where someone is making you feel like you're too much or not enough or wrong in some fundamental way, I want you to hear this. You're not the problem, and you don't have to stay. You don't have to earn the right to be treated with dignity. You don't have to prove your worth to people who've already decided not to see it. You just have to decide that your peace, your mental health, your sense of self, that those things matter more than staying somewhere that doesn't value you. Daniel's story isn't about revenge. It's not about proving Roger wrong or making him regret his choices. It's about something quieter and more powerful. The decision to stop playing a game you were never going to win and to find a place where you don't have to play games at all. And here's what I've learned after decades of listening to stories like this. The people who thrive aren't the ones who never face cruelty or unfairness. They're the ones who refuse to let it define them, who walk away when they need to, who choose environments that match their values, who understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to fight harder, but to leave. So tell me, where are you in your own story right now? Are you in the spark, where something small is starting to shift? Are you at the breaking point, where you're realizing you can't keep going the way you have been? Or are you already in the lesson, looking back and understanding what it all meant? Because wherever you are, I want you to know, your story matters, your experience is real, and you deserve to be in spaces that don't punish you for being human. Daniel smiled again, not because he forgot what Roger did, but because he learned that some people will never appreciate you, and that's okay, because their opinion
isn't the one that matters most. Yours is. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments. And if you're going through something similar, I hope this gave you permission to choose yourself. You don't need anyone's approval to do that. You just need to believe you're worth it. And you are.